A boot pressed hard against a rotting wooden door, and the old wood split open with a sharp crack. Dust rolled out into the cold mountain air. The smell of 50-year-old rot hit him in the face. A pack hit the floor inside. Then everything went quiet. Dead quiet. He took one step in. The boards groaned under his weight. He took another step, and that's when he heard it. A thump. Soft. Slow. Coming from somewhere below his feet. He froze where he stood. Then it came again. Steadier this time. Almost like a heartbeat. Almost like something was breathing down there. His name was Carl Henson, 58 years old, a mountain man who had walked into 1,000 abandoned places and never once been afraid. He was afraid now. What was breathing under a floor that hadn't been opened in 50 years? Stay with me on this one. Carl had been hunting cabins like this for 30 years. Not hunting them like trophies. Hunting them like a man hunts answers. He lived alone now, ever since his wife passed in the spring of 2018. His daughter lived in Knoxville. She called every Sunday. He answered most of the time. The rest of the week, he was in the woods. The Appalachians have 1,000 secrets nobody talks about anymore. Old logging cabins. Trapper shacks. Moonshine stills gone to rot. Carl had walked to most of them. He kept a notebook. He kept his grandfather's brass compass on a chain around his neck. He kept his mouth shut about what he found. But this one was different. He had heard about the cabin in Linville for years. An old man at the gas station told him about it back in 1992. Said a man named Owen Crane had walked up that ridge in the spring of 1975 and never come back. Said the search parties went up for 2 weeks and found not one footprint, not one piece of clothing, not one sign that Owen had ever existed up there. Said the family stopped looking after a while. Said the woods just took him. Carl had filed it away. Owen Crane, 1975, North Ridge above Linville. He'd written it down in pencil and gone on with his life. But last summer, a young surveyor showed Carl some satellite images of that ridge. And there, in a clearing nobody walked to anymore, was a cabin. Just sitting there. Untouched. Roof partially caved in but the walls still up. Trees growing right up against it. The kind of cabin that hadn't seen a human being in a long, long time. Now here's the thing about Carl. He didn't go up there right away. He waited a year. Some places you don't rush at. Some places you let sit for one more season, just to see if anything changes. Nothing changed. So this October, Carl packed his gear. Bedroll. 3 days of food. Rifle. Knife. Crowbar. Flashlight. The compass. He hiked in alone. 4 days through some of the steepest country in the state. He didn't see another human being. He didn't expect to. On the 4th afternoon, he came over a saddle in the ridge and saw it. The cabin. Smaller than he'd expected. Hunched against a rock face. Trees pressing in from every side, like the forest was trying to swallow it whole. He stopped right there. Just looked. Something about it didn't feel right. Most abandoned cabins, you walk up to them and they feel empty. Hollow. Like a shell that's been picked clean. This one didn't feel empty. It felt held. Like something was waiting inside. Carl had been doing this 30 years. He had felt that feeling exactly twice before. Once in a hunting cabin in Tennessee, where a man had hung himself in 1962. Once in an old church in West Virginia, where the floorboards still held the smell of something nobody wanted to name. Both times he had walked away. This time he didn't. He came down the slope slow. Rifle in his right hand. Flashlight clipped to his belt. He circled the cabin twice before approaching the door. He looked for tracks, animal scat, anything fresh. The ground around the cabin was thick with leaves, 50 years of seasons piled up against the walls. But there was a path, a faint one, almost invisible, coming up the ridge from the east, curving around the back of the cabin, ending at a small woodshed 20 feet from the door. Somebody had walked this path. Not recently, but more recently than 1975. Carl crouched down and ran his fingers through the leaves. Underneath, the ground was packed, compressed, the way ground gets when a single set of feet walks it again and again over decades. He stood up slow. His mouth had gone dry. He turned to the door. The wood was rotted clean through where it met the frame. The latch was rusted shut. He could have pried it open with a stick. Instead, he stepped back and lifted his boot. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was caution. He wanted whatever was inside to know he was there before he saw it. He drove his boot into the door. The wood split open like it had been waiting for him. And that's when he heard the first thump from below. The thump came again. Then again. Slow, almost gentle, but absolutely real. Carl stayed in the doorway for a full minute. He didn't move. He listened. He counted between thumps, about 4 seconds apart. Steady, like a clock. Then he stepped inside. The cabin was small. One room. A stone fireplace on the back wall. A wooden table set for two cracked plates, 2 tin cups, 2 spoons. A bed in the corner with a wool blanket folded across it. A lantern on the table, dust on the glass, but the wick still in it. The oil reservoir half full. It was as if someone had set the table for dinner and just walked out. Carl's flashlight beam moved slow over everything. Nothing was knocked over. Nothing was disturbed. There was no evidence of a struggle. No evidence of an animal getting in. The cabin was sealed up tight. Except for that path outside. Except for the thump under the floor. Carl moved across the room. The boards creaked under him, but they held. Whoever had built this cabin had known what they were doing. Heart pine by the look of it. The kind of wood that lasts 150 years if you keep it dry. He stopped in the middle of the room and shone his flashlight at his feet. There, under the rug, the faint outline of a cellar door. He bent down. He pulled the rug back. The trapdoor was old, square about 3 feet across. Thick wood banded with iron. A rope handle rotted through. A latch on the side, but the latch wasn't locked. The thump came again. Right beneath his hand. Carl pulled out his hunting knife. He cut the rotted ropes away. He worked the latch loose. He hooked his fingers under the edge of the trapdoor and lifted. The hinges groaned. A wave of stale air rolled up out of the dark. Cold. Damp. The smell of root cellar, earth and old wood and something else. Something he couldn't name. He swung the trapdoor all the way open and let it rest against the floor. He shone his flashlight down. A wooden ladder. 6 rungs. Below the ladder, a packed dirt floor. And in the middle of that floor, a wooden box. The box was about the size of a small coffin. Iron banded. Sealed shut with 3 heavy iron bolts. The wood was old but not rotted. Someone had treated it. Someone had cared for it. And from inside that box, the thumping was coming. Carl knelt at the edge of the trapdoor. He shone his light directly on the box. He stared at it for a long time. He had walked into 100 abandoned places. He had found bones. He had found old letters. He had found the small heartbreaks people leave behind. He had never found a sealed box that was making sound. He climbed down the ladder slow. The cellar was small, maybe 8 feet by 8. Stone walls, hard-packed floor, cold but dry. The temperature was a good 15 degrees lower than the cabin above. A natural ice box. He stepped over to the box and crouched beside it. Up close, the thumping was louder. He could feel it through the wood. He put his hand flat on the lid. He could feel the vibration. Something inside was moving. Slowly, patiently, like it had been moving for a long time and had no reason to stop. He listened to his own breathing. Then he sat back on his heels. He looked around the cellar. He looked up at the trapdoor above him. The light from his flashlight bounced off the stone walls. Nothing else down here. No supplies. No bones. No evidence. Just the box. And here is where Carl made a decision he would regret for the rest of the day. He stood up. He brushed the dirt off his knees. He told himself out loud, it's probably the wind. Some kind of pipe. Old wood settling. He didn't believe himself. But he said it anyway. He pulled out his flask. Took a small sip. Wiped his mouth on his sleeve. He looked at the box one more time. He almost smiled. You've been alone too long, Carl, he said to himself. You're hearing things. He turned around. He started toward the ladder. He told himself he would document this. Photograph the cabin. Mark the location. Come back next spring with a partner. Open the box properly. Maybe it was just trapped air. Maybe it was nothing. He put one hand on the ladder rung. He took a slow breath. The cabin above him was silent. The thump under the lid was silent. The whole world had gone quiet for one perfect second. And in that second, Carl Hinson really believed, that he was about to walk back up that ladder, climb out of that cellar, and head home with a story. He believed it. For about 4 more seconds. That's when the thump turned into a scratch. Sharp. Deliberate. The sound of something with claws dragging itself across wood. Not random. Not settling. Not wind. Carl froze with his hand on the ladder. The scratch came again. Slow at first. Then faster. Something was moving inside that box. Something with weight. Something with intention. He turned around. The flashlight beam hit the box, and Carl's whole understanding of what was happening shifted in the space of one heartbeat. This wasn't a 50-year-old riddle. This wasn't an old wooden secret left to rot. Whatever was in that box was alive. Right now. In this cellar. With him. And alive things don't survive 50 years sealed in a box. So one of two things had to be true. Either he was wrong about how long this cabin had been empty, or someone had been here. Recently. Carl set his flashlight on a flat stone, beam pointed at the box. He pulled the crowbar from his pack. He knelt beside the box and slid the flat end under the first iron band. The scratching stopped. Whatever was inside heard him. He worked the crowbar slow. The first iron bolt gave with a metal squeal. The second was tighter. He had to brace his foot against the box and pull with his whole weight. It came free with a dull pop. He set it on the stone floor beside him. 3 iron bolts in total. He worked the third loose. The lid was free. Carl sat back. He wiped sweat from his forehead, even though the cellar was cold. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. Then he reached for the lid. He hooked his fingers under the front edge. He took a slow breath. He lifted. The lid was heavier than he expected. He had to use both hands. He raised it about a foot, paused, listened. Nothing moved. He raised it another 6 inches. Then he tilted it back and rested it against the wall behind the box. He pointed the flashlight inside. What he saw didn't make sense. The inside of the box was lined with dirt and small stones. A burrow, basically. A small hole had been dug into one corner of the dirt, about 4 inches across. Fresh earth was piled around it. Something had been digging. Recently. And curled up in the opposite corner, pressed against the wood, was a creature. A marmot. But not just any marmot. This one was huge. Twice the size of any marmot Carl had ever seen in the Carolinas. Its fur was matted and gray, almost white around the muzzle. Its eyes were filmed over with cataracts. Its breathing was shallow but steady. It looked at Carl. It didn't move. It didn't run. It just looked. And here's what Carl knew, because Carl knew his animals. Marmots live 10 years. Maybe 15 in the wild. This thing in front of him couldn't be 50 years old. So how was it still here? Carl backed away from the box. He kept the flashlight on the marmot. The marmot watched him. Its chest rose and fell in slow, soft beats. It looked tired. It looked old. It looked, Carl realized, like a creature that was being kept alive. That word landed in his chest like a stone. Kept. He swung the flashlight around the cellar. And that's when he saw what he had missed before. The far wall, the one opposite the ladder, was covered in small wooden tags. And carved. Each one hanging from a nail driven into the stone mortar. There must have been 30 of them. Maybe more. Carl moved closer. He picked up the lowest tag. He held the flashlight on it. The tag had a name on one side, carved careful, Henry I. On the other side, 2 dates. A start date. An end date. 1974 to 1979. He set it down. He picked up another. Henry II 1979 to 1986. Henry II 1986 to 1992. He moved down the line. The dates climbed. The names climbed. Each one a marmot. Each one a life. Each one ending. Each one being replaced. Henry IV. Henry V. Henry VI. He reached the most recent tag. It was hanging by itself, away from the others, with no end date carved yet. Just a name. And a beginning. Henry IX 2012. 14 years ago. Carl stood in the cold cellar with that wooden tag in his hand, and his mind put together what his gut had already known. Somebody was coming up here. Somebody had been coming up here for over 50 years. Bringing food. Bringing water. Carving tags when one died. Bringing a new one when the old one passed. Sealing the box back up with 3 iron bolts every single time. For 5 decades. Somebody had built their whole secret life around this cabin and the creature in this box. If you're still with me on this one, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. This is a story I want you to remember. Now let's keep going. Because Carl looked up at the trapdoor. He listened. Outside the cabin, faint, very faint, he heard something he had not heard for the last 4 days in these woods. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming up the ridge from the east. Carl killed the flashlight. The cellar went black. In the dark, Carl moved fast. He climbed the ladder 1 rung at a time, careful not to make it creak. He came up through the trapdoor and lowered it gently behind him. He left it cracked an inch, enough that the marmot wouldn't suffocate, not enough to be obvious. He pulled the rug back over it. He moved across the cabin floor on the balls of his feet. The footsteps outside were close now. Maybe 70 yards out. Climbing the last bit of the ridge. Carl pulled his rifle from his pack. He didn't load a round into the chamber. He didn't want to be the man who shot first up here. But he checked the magazine. 3 rounds. He flipped off the safety. He moved to the corner of the cabin behind the door. The broken door hung on one hinge, half open. From this corner, he could see anyone who came through, and they couldn't see him. Not at first. He waited. The footsteps reached the clearing. They stopped. Carl held his breath. He could hear the visitor breathing. Heavy, wet, the breath of a man who had walked a long way and was old enough that the walking cost him. The footsteps started again. Slower now. Coming toward the door. Then they stopped again. The visitor had seen the broken door. Carl heard a sound he didn't expect. A sound that didn't fit any of the scenarios he'd been running through his head. The visitor was crying. Not loud. Not a wail. Just soft, broken weeping. The kind a man does when he hasn't cried in front of anyone for 40 years and isn't going to start now. Carl listened for another moment. Then he stepped out from behind the door. "Sir," he said. "Come. Low. Don't run." The figure in the doorway flinched. Carl saw him clearly for the first time. An old man. 80 at least. Tall but stooped. Thin as a fence post. Carrying a small canvas sack over one shoulder. Wearing an old wool coat patched at the elbows. His face was wet. The old man didn't run. He dropped to his knees in the leaves. "You found him," he said. "You found Henry." Carl lowered the rifle. He didn't put it down. But he lowered it. "Who are you?" Carl said. The old man wiped his face on his sleeve. He didn't look at Carl. He looked at the open door of the cabin like it was the door of a church. "My name is Walter Crane," he said. "Owen Crane was my brother." Carl let that name settle in his chest. Owen Crane. The man who had walked up here in 1975 and never come back. "Mr. Crane," Carl said. "What is happening up here?" Walter Crane looked up at Carl. His eyes were pale and tired, and full of something Carl had been seeing in old men's eyes for 30 years. The look of a man carrying something he should have set down a long time ago. "My brother loved an animal," Walter said. "That's where it started. He loved an animal. He raised it from a pup. A marmot. Smartest animal you ever saw. Owen named him Henry." Walter coughed. He stayed on his knees. "Owen wasn't well," he said. The town was not kind to him. Owen was different. He carried things hard. The marmot was the only thing in his life that just loved him back. Plain. No questions." Carl waited. "Owen came up here in the spring of '75, Walter said. Brought Henry with him in a cage. Said he needed to be away from people for a while. I didn't argue with him. I should have. I should have come with him." Walter pressed his hand flat against the dirt. "He never came back," Walter said. "Search parties found nothing. After 2 weeks, my mother and I drove up the closest road. We sat in the truck and we cried. And then we went home and we acted like he was just gone." He looked up at Carl. "A year later, I came up here alone. I found the cabin. And I found my brother." Walter took a long, slow breath. He was inside. On the bed. He had passed in his sleep, near as I could tell. Cold. Hunger. Heart. I never knew. He was just gone. Peaceful looked like. Carl didn't speak. And in the corner, Walter said, there was Henry. Starving. Skin and bones. Just barely alive. Walter's voice broke for a second. He gathered it back. I couldn't kill him, Walter said. I couldn't take him down to town. Folks in town hadn't been kind to Owen. I wasn't going to bring his marmot down for them to gawk at. So I fed him. And I came back 2 weeks later and fed him again. And the next month. And the next. Carl finally understood. You've been coming up here for 50 years, he said. Walter nodded. 51 this spring. And the box, Carl said. Henry kept getting out, Walter said. Bears would come. Foxes. I built him the box. Sealed it tight. Cut breathing slits in the bottom you can't see. Lined it with dirt so he could burrow. Carl thought about the wooden tags. How many marmots, he said. Walter looked at the ground. Henry was the first, he said. He died in 79. I buried him out back. And then I sat here for a week and I thought about it. And I went down the mountain and I found a young marmot and I brought him up. And I called him Henry too. Walter's hands were trembling. And when that one passed, I got another. And another. Henry 9 is the one downstairs. He's the last one. I don't have another in me. He looked up at Carl. His eyes were wet again. I just couldn't let it end, he said. I couldn't let Owen end. Carl didn't say anything for a long time. He set the rifle down on the table. He walked over to Walter. He helped him up off the ground. The old man's hands were ice cold. They went into the cabin together. Carl pulled the rug back. He lifted the trapdoor. He climbed down first. Walter followed slow, one rung at a time, his knees trembling. Henry 9 was still in his corner of the box. He looked up when he heard them. Walter went to him slow. He reached into his canvas sack. He pulled out a piece of apple, a few seeds, a small chunk of bread. He set them down inside the box. He stroked the marmot's back with one finger. He's almost gone, Walter said. He's not eating much anymore. He won't last the winter. Carl stood at the foot of the ladder. He didn't speak. Walter sat on the dirt floor beside the box. His hand stayed on the marmot. The marmot's eyes closed slow, then opened, then closed again. I knew somebody would find this place eventually, Walter said. I always thought it would be a hunter. Or a logger. Or some kid lost on a trail. I didn't think it would be a man like you. Carl said, What do you mean, a man like me? A patient man, Walter said. They stayed in the cellar for a long time. Eventually, Walter wrapped Henry 9 in a small wool cloth he pulled from his sack. He left the box open. He left the iron bolts on the dirt floor. He climbed the ladder ahead of Carl, holding the marmot against his chest. Outside the cabin, behind the woodshed, Walter showed Carl what he had not noticed when he first arrived. 8 small mounds in the earth. Each one marked with a small flat stone. No names. No carvings. Walter said the names were on the wooden tags inside. Said the mounds were just for the bodies. Henry 1. Henry 2. Henry 3. All the way to Henry 8. Carl helped Walter clear the leaves off each stone. They walked down the mountain together. It took them 2 days. Walter was slow. Carl carried both packs. They stopped often. Walter talked a lot, in pieces, the way old men do when they have finally found someone who is not in a hurry. He talked about Owen as a boy. The way Owen used to whistle in 3 different keys. The way Owen could read the weather better than the radio. The way Owen had been gentle in a place that did not value gentleness. He talked about their mother. He talked about the funeral they never had. He talked about the marmots. Each one. Their personalities. The one who liked apples. The one who slept on his lap when he visited. the one who tried to follow him down the mountain in 1996 and almost made it. Carl listened. When they reached Carl's truck at the trailhead, Carl drove Walter into Linville. He bought him dinner at a small diner. Walter ate slow. Walter paid for his half. Then Carl drove him home. A small house at the edge of town. Walter lived alone. His wife had passed in 2008. They had no children. Carl wrote down his phone number on a napkin. He gave it to Walter. "You call me," Carl said. "Anything you need. You call me." Walter folded the napkin into his coat pocket. "I won't be needing much," he said. "But I appreciate it." Carl didn't tell anyone what he had found up there. Not his daughter. Not the old men at the gas station. Nobody. 2 months later, a letter arrived at Carl's place. Handwritten. Walter's handwriting was shaky now. The letter said Henry IX had passed in his sleep. The letter said Walter wanted Carl's help with one more thing. The letter said Walter wanted to burn the cabin down. He didn't want anyone else to find it. He didn't want anyone else to have to carry it. Carl drove back up that fall. They hiked in together. It took them 3 days. Walter was slower than he had been 2 months earlier. Carl carried more this time. Walter didn't argue. They reached the cabin in late afternoon. Walter went inside one last time. He sat on the bed where his brother had died 51 years before. He sat there for a long while. Carl stayed outside, by the woodshed, looking at the 8 stone mounds and the new 9th one Walter had dug himself. When Walter came out, his eyes were dry. They poured kerosene on the floor and the walls. They walked out to a safe distance. Walter struck the match. He didn't throw it. He set it down at the edge of the kerosene line and stepped back. The cabin caught slow. Then fast. Then it became a column of orange light against the gray October sky. The smoke rose for 2 hours. Walter stood and watched the whole time. He didn't sit down. He didn't speak. He just stood there with his hands at his sides. At the very end, when there was nothing left but a black square of ash and a chimney still standing, Walter turned to Carl. "He's home now," he said. Carl drove him back to Linville one last time. Walter passed the next march, in his sleep in his own bed, alone in the way a man is alone when he has just put down something very heavy. Carl thought about Walter for a long time after that. He thought about the cabin. He thought about the box. He thought about the thump under the floor that had stopped his heart. And he came to understand something he had not understood before. What had been alive under that floor for 50 years was not the marmot. It was a brother's grief. A brother's love. A quiet, strange kind of love that nobody in town would have understood. The kind of love that builds boxes. The kind of love that climbs ridges in the snow to feed an animal nobody knows exists. Carl walked into a lot of cabins after that. He found a lot of small heartbreaks people had left behind. But he never found another one like Walter's. He kept his grandfather's compass on a chain around his neck. And every time he opened a door that had been closed for a long time, he listened first. For a very long time. For anything that might still be alive in there. Because some things, he had learned, are kept alive by people we will never meet.